All right. Thank you to everyone that has joined us this afternoon. We're happy to host our second information roundup, which is a conversation series that we started last year at the iSchool to just kind of show the impact of what we're working on at the iSchool, different implications of information, and to showcase some of our talented faculty. I'm happy to have a few of our talented faculty with us this afternoon, in fact, to discuss how community engaged research is taking place at the iSchool. So if I could start with Dr. Angela Smith, please introduce yourself, give us a sense of your background and kind of your current research.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Shannon. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Angela Smith. I'm an assistant professor here in the iSchool, of course. And a little bit about my research, I explore how critical and intersectional theoretical lenses, such as critical race theory, such as, intersectionality, but really how they can come together to inform an asset-based participatory design of technologies to support historically marginalized groups, most notably individuals experiencing homelessness, but really just aiming to pursue sustainable emancipatory transformations and also socially responsible technology experiences. So I'll leave it at that, but I'll definitely go into more detail later.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Dr. Hauser.
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name's Elliot Houser. I'm an assistant professor at the iSchool. And my work is really focused on sites and situations where action is taken because of information. That's the lens that I bring to a lot of different sites and work. And I'm starting a big cross-campus collaboration on socio-technical robotics. And so I'll talk a little bit more as we go through the event on the ways in which that robotics, especially deployed robotics, robots doing real things in the community, really necessitates community engaged research.
Thank you, Dr. Hauser. And finally, Dr. Fleischmann.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Hi, I'm Ken Fleischmann. I'm a professor in the School of Information. I'm also the founding chair of Good Systems, the UT Grand Challenge. So my research is on the role of human values in the design of use of information technologies, most specifically ethics of AI. So our Grand Challenge, Good Systems, focuses on the ethical implications of AI and how to define what it means for an AI-based system to be good, how to evaluate the goodness of a system, and then how to build a system that will hopefully be a good system. And I'm also the director of undergraduate studies here in the iSchool. Thanks.
Wear many hats, Dr. Fleischmann. So today, the goal of our discussion is to talk a little bit more about community engaged research at the iSchool, and specifically how socio-technical interventions are being leveraged for equitable access in underserved communities. Dr. Fleischmann, would you like to share more about what work has been done toward this effort?
Absolutely. So one of the big emphases within Good Systems, the UT Grand Challenge, has been to do community engaged research. Specifically, we've been partnering with the city of Austin. And so last year, we funded 11 different research projects. 7 of them were in collaboration with the city of Austin. Partly from that collaboration between Good Systems and City of Austin, and also other events happening across campus in relation to the city, we actually, the UT Austin recently signed an interlocal agreement with the City of Austin. So the interlocal agreement between City of Austin and UT Austin allows for funds to be moved from one organization to the other to support research that's going to serve the residents of Austin, as well as data sharing and other aspects that promote coordination between local government and the university. So that's been a really huge accomplishment for the university, and trying to better facilitate how we can collaborate with local government. Specifically, one of the 7 projects was Smart Cities Should Be Good Cities, AI, Equity, and Homelessness. We're looking at how we can leverage data science and AI techniques to identify opportunities to better serve residents who are homeless and who are experiencing homelessness. And we are also coordinating with the service providers who provide services for people experiencing homelessness to make sure that they're able to leverage those resources to the greatest good possible. And so that project was in the first year funded by Good Systems. Now it's being funded by the City of Austin, by the Downtown Austin Community Court, which has a program designed to help people experiencing homelessness to have access to permanent supportive housing and all of the resources and services that would help them to be as successful as possible. And so we're really excited about that collaboration between the city and the university. Another project that I'm involved in and the iSchool is working on is part of the NSF Civic Innovation Challenge. So NSF is funding 17 projects nationally, each at about $1 million of funding that are all collaborations between some combination of university, government, and nonprofit organizations. So we're partnering with the City of Austin as well as with Jail to Jobs, a nonprofit organization, and specifically in the Georgian Acres neighborhood. Georgian Acres is a neighborhood that has basically been sliced into pieces by transportation, by the highway system that separates the community from a lot of, it makes it harder to get from one neighborhood to the next. It makes it harder to get to work and to get to the places that people need to go. So we're looking at transportation options, including a circulator and a community hub for smart mobility that's going to provide access to e-scooters, e-bikes, and other modes of shared transportation to try to facilitate access in that sense. And the last project that I've been working on in this space, and that this really has been a broad iSchool collaboration. So Elliot was involved as one of the organizers, and many of us in the iSchool were involved, is the Public Interest Technology Social Justice Informatics Faculty Fellows Program. So we've been building a community of practice across the City of Austin in the social justice informatics space. And actually, I'll leave it to Angela to talk more about social justice informatics, because that's her area of expertise. And I'm thrilled that she'll be teaching our new Introduction to Social Justice Informatics as part of the exciting social justice informatics concentration that we're launching in our undergraduate informatics major. But we're able to bring together faculty from 4 different departments at Houston-Tillotson University. Houston-Tillotson is the oldest university here in the city of Austin. It's also a small liberal arts school and also at HBCU, as well as from Texas State, which is an HSI, as well as 6 different departments, so 6 different schools and colleges from the University of Texas at Austin, including, again, heavy representation from the iSchool, but also several other units, as well as from the city of Austin, and 8 different nonprofits. Our main partners are Capacity, Catalyst, and Measure. They both leverage data science in the interest of social, especially racial justice. So it's been a really wonderful group of colleagues from nonprofits, from government, and from academia who are committed to a shared vision of how we can leverage research to try to build a more equitable, a more just society. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fleischmann, and great shout out to Dr. Smith. We are excited about your presence, and as well, Dr. Houser. He's going to say more about the cool things that we're working on. Before I move into my questions, do you two have anything to add, Dr. Houser or Dr. Smith, or did Dr. Fleischmann cover it?
Ken is definitely a nexus of connection amongst connectors. We think of ourselves as connectors at the iSchool, and Ken definitely is emblematic of that. So I'm sure we'll be able to add as the conversation goes along. But that was an excellent overview.
Thank you so much. No, we want to be like Ken when we grow up when it comes to connections, absolutely. But no, and all jokes aside, great partnerships that are laid out, and we're very excited about what the future holds with how the iSchool is working with not only the community, but serving the community through our work. One thing that I also wanted to point out from a housekeeping standpoint, we are in a webinar setup today for this discussion. So while participants won't necessarily be on camera or be able to come off audio, I encourage you to engage with us in the chat through a question in if you have it, or a comment. If you want to say amen to something that someone says today because it was great, definitely do so, because we'd love to engage with you in that way. I want to jump into some questions that I have. First off, and anyone can answer this, why is community engaged research important? Tell us more about why that's important. Maybe Dr. Houser or Dr. Smith.
I'll pass it off to Elliot first.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think one of the things I can kind of speak from my standpoint in beginning this big robotics collaboration, which might feel like it's a little off center, right, from community engaged research, but I think maybe it's a good example of why it's important. The team that we're partnering with, the kind of core of the robotics team, was a previously existing interdisciplinary group of roboticists that wanted to use UT's campus as a laboratory to develop autonomous delivery services using robots. And they knew that would have an impact on the campus community, but they kind of didn't have the social science methodologies to kind of really address that as part of their research, as part of the deployment, and as part of the design of the systems. And so the collaboration, for socio-technical robotics is really bringing social scientists together to study the process of, developing these robots, to really bring methods that can keep the communities in view, right? Human-robot interaction is an active area of research, but a lot like kind of the early days of human-computer interaction, it's very dyadic. It's one individual and one robot. Let's study that, and especially in laboratory settings. And there's not as much of a developed community of research around community robot interaction. And so that's one of the things that we're working on together to kind of develop the methodologies to do that. Now, we're talking about the UT campus community, right? And community engaged research, I think, often will imply, underserved communities outside the university. And I want to, I think, just highlight, in the case of robotics technologies, we're not really sure what the impacts are going to be. And so the appropriate place to test out that kind of technology is somewhere where we have a lot more control around it, and it's not necessarily going to be something that someone's going to be relying on for like human services or something like that. At the same time, the project is oriented outside of campus. So you mentioned public interest technology. We have a grant under review to develop a cloud-based robotics education platform that will allow students to kind of program robots in their browser, but then also upload that code to robots either right there with them or over the network to robots that are housed in the robotics building at UT Austin. And that's going to be piloted simultaneously at UT and at Houston-Tillotson. And so, I think inevitably community engaged research, even if it's more appropriate for a given project to start with the community of convenience, to start with one's own community, that inevitably leads outwards.
Thank you, Dr. Houser. Dr. Smith, you were going to add something?
Oh, yeah, I think in terms of research, I think really community-based research is a chance for us to kind of get out of the ivory tower. And I think specifically at UT, it's like the literal ivory tower there. But I think also in a lot of places too, like the university is perfectly situated within the city in which it has access to a lot of different resources as well as communities. And I think what's great about being a researcher, and yes, like in a lot of ways that we are traditionally, trained, and that we do have, like Elliot was mentioning, specific skills and methodologies and things that we can do, we can really employ those with a lot of different groups of people to help them get to outcomes they may not have ever imagined or dreamed of or been able to kind of, create on their own. So I think it's a good way to really just give back and using those things that we do. So I think,
Thank you.
At its core.
Thank you. So another question that I had is, what challenges do you guys face or do you anticipate in doing this type of work? Dr. Fleischmann, you want to chime in, or Dr. Smith?
I can go ahead. So it's really challenging to balance. As I completely agree with everything that Elliot and Angela said about how important it is to be engaged with the community and to do community engaged research. that sort of ivory tower divide that Angela was just talking about, it's real, and it makes communication, among other things, really challenging. Folks in academia often use different terminology from members of the community or folks in nonprofits or government, and often have different limitations, different organizational constraints, different resources, and different goals in some cases. So, I mean, I don't think it's a challenge that can't be overcome. I definitely think that as we work together, and that's something over the year of our faculty fellows program focusing on social justice informatics, funded by the Public Interest Technology University Network, that we were able to build really good lines of communication, really good shared understanding of first what social justice informatics was across the different stakeholders in our group and the different organizations represented, and then how we could build those productive collaborations. So it's a challenge, but I think it's an exciting, important, and fun challenge. And it's something that increasingly is being recognized by, for example, the National Science Foundation, as they partner with MetroLab on the Civic Innovation Challenge. They're putting a significant, substantial investment into community engaged research, understanding that in many cases it can be challenging, but it's really vital that the research that we're doing helps the residents of Austin, helps our community, and has, of course, does the most good for people who can most would stand to benefit from that. And so it's really important that we are proceeding from a distributive and restorative justice perspective in our research. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Smith, you were going to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think challenges, specifically in working with marginalized populations, there's a lot to overcome. One of the biggest things that I always think about is, gatekeeping and building trust and rapport, and like, what does it mean to kind of go in with these communities? Because a lot of times too, it's like they're approaching it from such a, researchers always just come in and take perspective. So it really is, how do we make this a mutually beneficial experience? And I think in a lot of times too, when we think of starting those community partnerships, it's like going in and kind of spending that time there, getting to know organizations, getting to know people, how things are run, but really also to build up rapport and to kind of build up that relationship too. And it's like, yeah, that leads to more fruitful and richer data. But I think also too, it starts to lessen that power differential between ourselves as researchers and our communities as well. So I definitely think that's a big one to overcome. And I think too, when we're thinking about, technology, a lot of times it's more than just access that's the issue. It's all the other things that kind of come along with it too. So when you're thinking about that big literacy piece, but I think there's a number of challenges that can sometimes be present, but I think, like Dr. Fleischmann said, there's not something that you can't overcome. And I think it's really just kind of putting in the time where necessary to do so.
Great, thank you.
And, if I add a little something, forget, it'll be nerd out a little bit. And in kind of social research, there are these kind of concepts of etic and imic, right? Whether you're studying a community from the outside or imic from the inside. And that's, I think, a really interesting framework to locate some of these challenges. I mentioned, some of the robotics work is really focused on the UT campus. And so as members of that campus, we're doing that taking that imic perspective on that. But it also, that also circumscribes the potential impact that we can have with that one study, unless we're also oriented outwards. Now, for that kind of etic, orientation towards another community, that's kind of inherent for marginalized communities, right? Because marginalized communities don't have the representation in universities by definition, things like that. But communities aren't bright, hard lines. There's an articulation of communities towards each other. And the more that we build these kind of mutual relationships of respect and trust that Ken was talking about with the city or with Houston Tillotson, then the communities merge and they really change each other through the process. To me, when you talk about community engaged, that engagement is a process of mutual change. And so then it starts to blur those lines a little bit. and the studies that we do of ourselves, the studies that we do of others, start to blend a little bit. And so some of the issues inherent in either start to fade away as the communities kind of merge, as we build those relationships.
Wonderful. And I love when you nerd out. Continue to do so. I wrote down 2 new vocabulary words. So that was also a nice segue. What opportunities do you see with community engaged research? I mean, to me, it sounds like the challenges are really opportunities as well, but what else could you point to that are opportunities in this work? Anyone can take that one. Don't be shy. Go ahead, Ken.
Well, I'll build on Angela's great point earlier that Elliot was also alluding to, which is that we as academics have so much to learn from members of the community. So it shouldn't be a situation where academics come in and say, you know, what are the problems that you're facing and how can we as academics come in and solve them on our own? We'll be really incompetent at that, among other things. But we also would be underappreciating what community members can bring to the table in terms of their lived experience and the insights that they can share and provide in, as Angela was rightly emphasizing, in a mutually beneficial way. So not in the sense of going out into the community and doing our research and then leaving and not worrying about whether we've made the community a better place or not. We hope that by working with members of the community together, we can empower members of the community to make improvements that advance the situation for the members of their community, but that has to be in collaboration. So I think that opportunity to mutually learn, to mutually grow is a really exciting opportunity.
Wonderful, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll add on to Dr. Fleischmann. I mean, also in regards to so much that I feel even the big tech companies, researchers, you know, we talk so much about being inclusive, and I think we can hardly be inclusive without talking about the communities that we're interested in or the communities that we're deploying things in, whether they're, you know, new technology, new curriculums, new programs, what have you. But a lot of times by not taking that truly inclusive perspective, by including them within our research, you know, our tools, our, you know, our tech, it can be a lot more harmful than it could ever be good. And I think, you know, like Dr. Fleischmann was mentioning, but like including them in the process, making it collaborative, kind of from like the research design phase throughout the process, the data collection, even the analysis, you know, kicking things back to them and getting their perspective on things, member checking things, doing all these things to kind of make sure that we're going in the right direction. It allows us to have much more benevolent outcomes, because I think that's really what we want to aim for at the end of the day. It's like, I don't think people go into things wanting to do things harmfully, but by taking this ignorant perspective, that's inevitably what we're doing.
I have a follow-on question to that regarding inclusivity. Kind of what methods or what do you put in place to ensure that you're being inclusive and not harmful? Like, I know most of your work seems to be very collaborative, but do you have certain things in place that you're kind of disaster checking for those things? Anyone can answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, I could start it, sure. Disaster checking, that's great. I'll add that to my vocab over here. But no, I think, like I said, I think it really does start kind of at the research design phase. Like, what questions are we asking? And I think going into the organizations, because it's similar to, for a lot of times when we're doing collaborations at the institution perspective, we're getting like, you know, MOUs or whatever the formal agreements are for doing collaborations with these organizations, but really just getting their support. Like, we want to have their support in it. And I think a lot of times too, what I ask is, you know, is there some question that you're interested in that I can help you out with while we're doing this research here? So they do kind of have a buy-in and investment to it. And then I think even once you're going through kind of like the data collection and having those ongoing meetings to say, you know, like, this is what happened, this is what I found, these are some preliminary things that I found, and, you know, kind of showing them in whatever shape or form feels most comfortable. So whether it's, you know, raw data or whether it's kind of more overarching themes, but, you know, allowing them to kind of check that information and, you know, provide validation to it. and then kind of continuing still. But even I think where it gets to is at the close of the project, it's like going back and doing that dissemination piece in a way that's meaningful for them. So if we're doing research with kids, maybe we're creating zines, or we're creating comic books of the sort, or once we think about the more executive levels at that, we're kind of creating those one-page summaries that people can kind of latch onto. But I think it really is that. And then I think even still, it's like at that point, once the project's done, our role as researchers is to still continue to kind of nurture that relationship there. So I think understanding what that looks like, it's like, yeah, the project's done, but again, what does that look like? How are we kind of maintaining this relationship? How are we maintaining this technology? Because one big thing I would say, especially working with marginalized populations, is the sustainability aspect. We don't ever want to kind of come in these spaces, introduce technology, introduce tools, and just leave them there without any kind of, path to continue. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Dr. Houser, did you have something to add there?
Well, I mean, this goes back a little bit to some of the opportunities. Ken mentioned social justice informatics. Like, there's no journal of social justice informatics right now. I'm so excited for Angela's, course next semester, and her research program, right, as a vision of what this can and should be. And that's not just to say, okay, once there is a journal of social justice informatics, we're going to be done, right? But that's an intellectual center of gravity for refining the answers to some of these questions that we're talking about. And, we shouldn't just kind of coalescing the community of researchers that care about these sorts of things, so we can learn from each other and kind of articulate, to the broader research community, here's a new way of doing research. In talking about aligning interests, there's a lot of, even in interdisciplinary work, like there's a culture of, deploy technology in robotics. And regardless of what community you're working with, that's probably not the first step, right? That might be the first step to make advances in computer vision or navigation technologies. And so, we're kind of articulating between us on the team. Okay, so here's a path of testing out basic autonomy on UT's campus. But if you talk about really starting to try to use autonomous delivery robots in a specific setting, like for instance, in the libraries to move materials around, well, you're interacting with the real person's livelihood. You're interacting, with library staff. Eventually, indirectly, you're impacting library users. That's a little bit different than, having a bystander see a robot walking down the sidewalk or making sure that the robot knows how to not hit people. There's a deeper impact there. And so trying to identify those cases where there's like a really impactful, this is a really portentous moment, and make sure, so we're going to try and spend about 1.5 years trying to look at how materials delivery is accomplished, what's its institutional history, what are the labor dynamics, is it sustainable, all that sort of stuff, before we can really feel like we can rigorously answer the question, maybe robots could help this activity. And more importantly than whether UT Libraries uses robots to deliver materials amongst the branches, which is kind of what we've sketched out why we're doing it that way, is the process. If we can articulate a reproducible process of, here's a community that I want to help. Step one, wait 2 years to deploy the technology, if you can, right? If you can get the grant funding to do that kind of research. And hopefully we can, develop a toolkit that's, people don't have 2 years to go, do an extensive ethnography of a site. Okay, well, here's the toolkit that will let you do a high quality evaluation of a site and of a community in just a few months or something like that. So it's a forum to have that kind of dialogue, right? Identifying the issues, and realizing when a technology does have the potential to cause harm, and making sure that you're addressing that before you start hypothesizing about what the benefits might be.
Thank you so much for pointing that out. Dr. Fleischmann, you had something to add?
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. I wanted to introduce I think a relevant concept here, which originally comes from the disability rights community, which is nothing about us without us. And so the importance, to the extent possible, when engaging in community-based research, to have a broad, inclusive team, including, to the extent possible, team members who have relevant lived experience to the community that we're trying to collaborate with. And I have to say, part of this, I mean, a part of that is sort of owning our own privilege and realizing the degree to which it limits the perspective of many folks in academia, including myself. But I've been fortunate to have the opportunity to collaborate with so many fabulous academics who bring relevant lived experience that really enriches projects, and really, from a feminist standpoint theory, really broadens the perspective, and is just incredibly valuable. So I've been just incredibly fortunate to have some fabulous colleagues. And I think I say fortunate in part because of unfortunately, how bad of a job historically academia has done of being sufficiently inclusive and representative. We have a long ways to go there. We're making, I think, some progress, but we really have a long ways to go to be. I think that in order for academia to really be successful in community engaged research, academia needs to represent the community to the greatest extent possible. So we really have more work. We're working really hard in the UT Austin School of Information, and I think we're making progress here. And I think the academy more broadly, perhaps a bit more slowly than we are. So I think we're doing a really good job quickly. But all of us have more to do in terms of broadening participation and ensuring broad representation in the academy. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Fleischmann. Switching gears a bit, but along those lines of collaboration, how do you all engage students in your work? And this work is taking place, how do you currently, or how do you envision engaging students? Anyone can jump in on that one.
Well, I'll start. I think I would say if you are a student interested in working with me, feel free. But no, really, I think it starts from just the point of interest, because I think too there's hardly kind of classes that are telling you how to do this work. So I think for a lot of us, it really is kind of trying to navigate spaces on our own. And I think that's where it really does start with kind of finding a mentor and finding a space where you can kind of ask those questions. Because when you think of kind of everything that academia teaches you, like everything is really to kind of protect the institution and kind of protect us. But I think so with that, like a lot of these things, they leave their the participants out of it. And even when I think of like the IRB and everything like that, and how we're not supposed to do harm, again, we're putting all these things in place to really kind of protect ourselves. And yeah, we're concerned about anonymity, but I think it really is just finding a mentor, someone that can teach you the methods, but also doing reading. There's we're not inventing the wheel by any means. I think in a lot of ways we're just synthesizing the material that's out there. We're doing some of the reading and we're trying to figure out how to navigate these spaces. But with that, knowing that someone has done the work and that you can find someone who can teach you in a much more readily accessible way to kind of do it. And I think it's one of those learning by doing things. So yeah, I would say, find someone whose work that you admire, that you're interested in, that you might find some spark of inspiration from, and just reach out to them. I think that's really where it starts.
Definitely. I think there's a couple of different, ways that students kind of can get involved or at least benefit from this. The first is, doctoral students are the ones that kind of we rely on for that hands-on training and hands-on help doing this cutting-edge research. And so I have several of us are recruiting doctoral students and engaging our existing doctoral students in these kind of projects. My teaching practice has kind of focused on programming. So I teach introduction to programming at the graduate and undergraduate level. And that's not necessarily community engaged research, right? But I will make the point that those of us, who do this kind of work, it inevitably impacts the way that we approach our teaching subjects. So I've framed my programming classes around communities of computing and technical communities. And in my classroom, explicitly, we develop a technical community that's going to be supportive and that's going to be inclusive. And we can control what happens in that classroom setting. And it's going to be a great place to learn. And then I send my students out into technical communities, meetup groups and things like that is one of the assignments. And they write a reflection on what is that like to, to kind of open that door into, these professional communities of programmers. And students have a range of experiences, but we talk and think about what kinds of inclusive actions make those communities a welcoming place or maybe a not so welcoming place. And very rarely is there any kind of malice in these spaces, but it's often just an ignorance or an apathy, as opposed to the ones that take active inclusive action. So I don't know, that's, again, not community engaged research, but thinking about pedagogical communities and technical communities as, things that exist out in the world. And in our classrooms, we're making a certain kind of culture. And slowly, we're participating in this cultural change that's happening across the academy, across different kinds of professions. So, at least for me, that's the way in which undergrad and master students might be impacted by this kind of work.
That's awesome. And I love to hear that they go out and you have them report back on experiences. That's positive. Dr. Fleischmann.
Yeah, sorry, Shannon. Elliot made such great points, and I really appreciate his pivot to the classroom. So I wanted to try to build on Elliot's points there. So I definitely think that that's one of the great things of being in academia is getting to do research and teaching and being able to connect those two. And that's what many of us here in this room and in the iSchool broadly work really hard to do. So it's really exciting to be able to bring our latest research results to the classroom and share them immediately. It's also, I think it's really important that as we're thinking about how to make our research as community engaged and inclusive as possible, it's also important to make our teaching as community engaged and inclusive, representative as possible. So I'll be teaching in the spring for the first time our new course, Ethical Foundations for Informatics, in our new informatics major. And this will build on ethics courses that I've been teaching for over a decade, which again, for over a decade, I've been teaching from a broad multicultural perspective, including feminist and non-Western perspectives. So it's just really, I really enjoy getting to cover perspectives such as Ubuntu, Buddhist ethics, Confucian ethics, Islamic ethics, Hindu ethics, ethics of care, and situated knowledges in my ethics courses, and then relating those feminist and non-Western perspectives to the informatics challenges that we face today, and think about how, as a global society, as a broad, inclusive, diverse society, how we can leverage all of the different understandings of what's right and wrong around the world from many different lived experiences to try to come up with technologies that hopefully will be inclusive and work for everyone. Thanks.
That's really important to point out. I know different ways of knowing and just the various, it's important. And if you're truly inclusive, those are things to have in consideration. So thank you for pointing that out, Dr. Fleischmann. I want to sit in on that class. I want to sit on all of your classes, but I still have to do my day job. But no, sounds fascinating. Another question that I was thinking about and wanted to pose was, you mentioned, of course, the whole topic today is around community research, or the engagement with community. How do you leverage other units on campus? Obviously, the iSchool is a pretty small unit among a very large tier 1 research institution, but how do you navigate those partnerships and just engaging and getting into the different conversations across campus? Dr. Fleischmann, you want to lead that one?
Thank you. This is something that, in helping to found Good Systems UT Grand Challenge. So our Grand Challenge, the executive team includes faculty from 6 different colleges and schools across campus. So architecture, natural sciences, liberal arts, communication, engineering, and the iSchool. So that's almost the breadth of the campus. And then when you add that our overall team of Good Systems UT Grand Challenge includes over 150 researchers faculty, student, and staff researchers from over 30 different departments and units across campus. So many different academic units from those CSUs that I just mentioned and beyond, but also the UT libraries, also TAC, the Texas Advanced Computing Center, or Supercomputing Center. So many different units across campus with so many perspectives. I would say that although certainly our number of faculty were growing rapidly, but yes, in some ways a bit smaller than liberal arts or natural sciences or engineering, but through Good Systems and our involvement, Good Systems is one of the 3 Bridging Barriers Research Grand Challenges on this campus. And if I was very happy, not surprised, but still very reassured and happy to see with the new, fairly new president that our strategic initiatives in research going forward are very much aligned with the 3 Bridging Barriers Research Grand Challenges, including Good Systems ET Grand Challenge. So I think we're definitely getting a lot of notice. So even though, yes, we're not the largest unit on campus, but certainly in Good Systems and also in many efforts due to our interdisciplinarity. So in many units, it's very challenging to build collaborations with other units because they're all sociologists, they're all civic engineers, they're all art historians. And it's very hard for them to build bridges across those different units when they're so disciplinarily tied and focused. But here in the iSchool, we have faculty with so many different PhDs and so many different academic backgrounds. And also the professional orientation of our school is a huge plus in this regard. I mean, certainly there are other professional schools on this campus, but certainly compared to faculty in natural sciences and in liberal arts, we have a much easier time interacting with working professionals because we spend so much of our time in the classroom teaching current and future professionals. So that really helps us as well. So I think in many cases we are able to, we certainly get assists from other units in terms of building collaborations and building relationships, but we're also often at that nexus point of making those connections and helping facilitate for other units. So I think that's a real opportunity for us in the School of Information to connect other units across campus with each other and with the community. And I think that as our Dean Eric Meyer talks about how we're bridgers in the iSchool, that bridging capability is something that can really benefit the university and benefit our entire city and community through that level of interdisciplinary and cross university to the community collaboration. Thanks.
Absolutely. I think we're very well positioned. Any final thoughts on that point?
Bring up the idea of basic research and the NSF has this idea of like basic research, knowledge for knowledge's sake, but they add on this mission-driven part, right? That there's an orientation towards something. And I think that's one of the things that iSchool faculty is really able to do, is to provide access to that kind of mission-driven piece. And that worked in robotics, right? When we joined that collaboration, they had a kind of a proof of concept robot that was delivering lemonade on campus because they needed, an example. But they knew that there was more potential there. There was something left on the table. They could do something that, could kind of play a role in a bigger mission. And so I was able, through the connection with Sam Baker and Good Systems and Peter Stone, other Good Systems co-founders, was able to kind of join the team, get a sense of what they were doing, and help them bring on other social science experts to the team to help collectively orient towards a mission, right? We're still publishing towards our basic science audiences, right? We're doing kind of foundational research, but we can kind of orient together towards that bigger mission.
Thank you, Dr. Houser. Before I jump into my final question, I want to acknowledge the time. We're about 15 minutes until 5. And so we're going to throw in the chat. We have an experiment that we're going to do today. We have another tool that we're going to try out called Gather, where we will have opportunity to have some after party time with some of the faculty. And so Jess is going to pop in the chat here in a bit a link to a tool that we're going to try out this afternoon between 5 and 5:30, a gathering where you guys can virtually interact with Dr. Fleischmann, Dr. Smith, and Dr. Houser. But for my final question, I wanted to throw out to all of you, I'd love to hear everyone chime in on this. What do you see on the horizon for community engaged research? Kind of what do you see on the horizon, or maybe what's some wish list things that you see for that type of research? Anyone can go first.
Mine is quick, and I've mentioned it before, but I kind of, as I get more involved in this research, I want to see an expansion, and specifically in robotics, human-robot interaction, an expansion to kind of community robot interaction, because we're already starting. The other day, yesterday, I was flying back from Salt Lake City, and there was a delivery robot just rolling through the airport. Right, this is coming, and I really don't think that we as a society understand what the impacts are going to be, and that it's just urgent that we develop methodologies that allow us to understand them and factor that back into how these technologies are designed and deployed.
Perfect, thank you. Dr. Smith?
Yeah, I think honestly being able to address societal problems and kind of making those changes. And I think a lot of it is, I would say, changes within communities, but also mindset changes too. And I think that's something that I'm trying to play with a little bit with my next research project, is really trying to understand and just conscientiousness, consciousness, and how we can apply that to research and how we can use that to transform behaviors, mindset, as well as, just depolarizing the other in certain situations. But I think really just truly getting a feeling for communities and taking it more so from a deficit perspective, but switching it to a more asset base and understanding what the true assets are of communities, and understanding that, trying to move away from this capitalist perspective of, assets, but more so understanding kind of the values and the different skills that communities already have that we can leverage to create more meaningful technologies.
Dr. Fleischmann, do you have any final thoughts there?
Yeah, I think in order to ensure that we're able to do community engaged research in the iSchool and beyond, we really need probably some fundamental structural changes to the academy. Elliot was mentioning at NSF, for example, the privileging of basic research, and certainly there's a lot to be said there. There's some progress I've seen at NSF through the Civic Innovation Challenge, some of the other efforts there. Seeing organizations like Metro Lab and New America that are making explicit efforts to connect between academia and government and foundations, nonprofits, is definitely promising direction. But we need to make sure that community engaged research is going to be appreciated through that entire, through the entire academy, up all the way up to the tower, as Angela was referring to earlier, and that it's appreciated as part of what we do, an important element. So I think the academy generally, and UT Austin and the iSchool in particular, are making progress in this regard. But I also think we have a ways to go to make sure that everyone is aware of the ability to try, like why it's important to try to do research that directly benefits our communities, and feels like we all have the resources, and that is going to be acknowledged and promoted, and is going to be supported by all the way up through the university and through our field. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fleischmann, and thank you, Dr. Houser and Smith, for the great conversation today. While we have about, it looks like 12 minutes left in our session with everyone, I want to encourage our guests to ask questions or to chime in with any comments while we're all together. And of course, at 5 o'clock, join us for Gather. But Dr. Houser, you had something?
Yeah, well, I actually have a question for my colleague, Angela.
Cool.
If I could put you on the spot. So, I mean, the kind of community engaged research you do, I have so much respect for. And you just joined us at the beginning of the semester, right? And it's so site specific, so localized. And I know that's got to be a challenge to kind of get that research program up and rolling and build those relationships. You know, for the efforts of Ken and others, right? There are pre-existing relationships with the community. I know that that's got to have been helpful. But I think you know firsthand what the challenges are going to be in really deeply embedding communities, and you obviously. It's really interesting to hear the challenges and successes that you've encountered over the past few months building this research program up, because your population that you were studying before is in another state, right?
No, absolutely. I thank you for that question, Dr. Houser. It's a very slow process. I think that's the thing with community-based research, and I think that's the thing that researchers, and I think just people who design and create tools need to be more mindful of. It's okay to not have quick turnarounds, especially in regards to when we think about writing papers as well. Excuse me. Because it's very much like I kind of mentioned, kind of like that gatekeeping, and also kind of building that trust and that rapport. And it's like coming up with this idea in mind, making sure you're kind of thinking from it from all angles, making sure like the questions that you're seeking to ask aren't causing harm, and the things that you're wanting to do, but really understanding what your commitments are. Asking, something that I'm trying to think through is like naming my commitments for like the project that I want to do, and then eventually when I'm able to start, I can go out and I can like act on these commitments. Commitments being, simple. Think about the things that you're doing across all of your projects in terms of like, respecting the community, respecting the individual, co-creating knowledge. A big thing about working with communities is this idea of co-creation and co-construction. Doing that, I do thank UT for having existing relationships in a lot of ways, because that does make it easier. It's like, oh, I can slide on in and kind of introduce myself too. But I think it also introduces one of those things of not overburdening communities that are always entrenched in research, and kind of understanding what other spaces and places are out there to kind of access it. And I think one of the things that I always think about too, when we think of historically marginalized communities and populations, is a lot of times when we kind of opt for, I would say, easier ways to access them. So through kind of existing communities we know, or existing, places or organizations that we do know, I think we're still accidentally and, unintentionally leaving out the people who need these services or these tools most. So it kind of brings you back to this question of, well, how do we access them, and like what does that look like? And I think being situated within like a public university, and having certain restrictions on us, I think it kind of poses a little bit more difficulties that you have to kind of navigate as well.
Great
Thank you.
question, Dr. Houser. Any other questions from the chat or from the participants? I think we may have a shy group where they're just taking in all of this great information, but I'm excited to see where your research goes, Dr. Smith and Dr. Houser. I've had conversations offline about robotics. It's just fascinating. I've seen some in action, but I can't wait to see them in very real world situations, because there are challenges that will come up, but it's great work and could be so meaningful. And then the train's taking off, like we're going there regardless. So we want to be a part of it as well.
In the comments, I think, Jackson, if I get that acronym right, AT, accessibility technology, I think that's a good indication of how complex and wicked this challenge is. I'm most familiar with accessibility from the standpoint of web standards. And there's just a massive amount of infrastructure that's required to provide. And I'm subsetting my experience. I know accessibility studies and accessibility technology is huge, but web standards, and especially for visually impaired users, there's the software infrastructure, screen readers, and web standards, and educational resources. And I remember encountering for the first time the ARIA hyphen attribute in an HTML element and kind of a web framework that I was using. I didn't really understand what it was, and that's basically what tells screen readers what this how to interpret this HTML element. And without that kind of markup, it becomes substantially less usable. But that's kind of that's become embedded in the practices of a large amount of web development culture, especially in kind of larger institutions like UT that are able to kind of enforce it uniformly. And there's still plenty of work to do. But when you look back at how much work there was to get us here, I use a Chrome OS as my operating system, and like most of them, it has a screen reader built in. And so, I can experience the websites that I design like a visually impaired user would do. And there's just decades of work, and enable all of these infrastructures. And so that's the scale of work. That's the scale of impact that this kind of orientation can have. And apologies if it seems like a trite example, but I just wanted to indicate that.
Thank you, Dr. Houser, and thank you, Jackson, for that comment, because I sat in on Dr. Newman's class recently around accessibility, and my mind was blown. We had an employer come in who kind of leads in a lot of these spaces, but I had no clue what all it entailed. And we're doing interesting work here at the iSchool around accessibility as well. Any other final thoughts or questions? Well, I don't want to, oh, there is one. Yay, let's see.
Oh, hi, Edgar.
Yay, Edgar, hope to meet you soon. Says, yeah, expand a bit on the idea of co-creation. So who wants to take that one? Dr. Smith.
Yes, just reading his question. I didn't realize, because it was funny, because I thought people were writing in the chat, and I was like, I don't see a question in the chat.
Yeah, I was going to say the
Q&A
Q&A box too.
Okay, so yeah, expand a little bit more on the idea of co-creation, because the common narrative seems to still separate community from academia. Yeah, so it's kind of when in my class I talk a lot about this idea of participatory design, structure, workshops, sessions, but it's this idea that came from Scandinavia back in like the 70s. But it's literally, you're going into communities as a researcher, and you're asking them these questions. You're putting questions in front of them, challenging their ways of thinking. So you're kind of building this knowledge and these things together, right? And I think it's interesting because some big designers in California, they created like a whole space around it. If you go to ideo.org, you can see some of the tools that they put behind it. But it's really a way to kind of challenge people's thinking, and some of the ideas behind it there. It's like, you've got blue sky thinking. So really it's like you're pushing people to be limitless in how they think about things. Like, for instance, how might we reimagine this cup, for instance, right? Given, X resources, or, this amount of time, right? So it's really interesting because it pushes people to think differently. But I think what some of the research has shown over the couple of years, it's really going into these moments and being more context aware, being aware of the spaces that we're occupying, but also that the participants are occupying, communities are occupying, being more familiar with their culture, their values, but also being more aware of the things that we're bringing to these participatory design sessions, because people attach values, and they attach feelings to different materials and different tools, and in a lot of ways that really impacts how successful sessions can be. And for instance, I think about my own research when I was attempting to do participatory design sessions with homeless emerging adults within the sheltered setting, but really understanding how that shelter really just it usurps their ability to think creatively, and honestly just to think without like all of these restrictions on it, because the shelter itself, it had so many limitations, it had so many rules, it had so many things. It just really made it very difficult and made it a challenge for them to think kind of outside that space that we were occupying. And without, all of the staff who still kind of walked by while they weren't in the room, they were still kind of present in the building. So it's still kind of one of those, I don't want to speak too loudly because I don't want other people to hear me kind of deal. So kind of going back to it, I think really to have successful co-creation, it is being mindful of all these things. And when we're, again, engaging in communities, I always think, it's like we just can't go into these spaces. We really have to learn about the spaces in which they occupy. And it's, again, really thinking about our own positionality as researchers and thinking about, our reflexivity as we think about this, because as researchers, we come in with inherent power, whether or not we, physically act on it or, physically discuss it. It's there between our participants. And I think thinking about ways in which we can kind of mitigate that between the activities that we do, the questions that we ask, thinking about how we involve them in that research to really make it a collaborative experience from the entire journey of research.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And I think we are now at our time. Thank you for that question. And thank you for everyone joining tonight. This was a good conversation this afternoon, and we look forward to having more of these types of discussions. So stay tuned for other events like Information Roundup or just good stuff coming out of the iSchool. There's more to come on that. Let's definitely, for those that are able and interested, just put the gather link in the chat. We'd love to see you over there for another few minutes. And again, the purpose is just to check out this tool, but also give you an opportunity to have more one-on-one or more clustered conversations with some of our faculty tonight. But for those that aren't joining us, thank you so much again for your participation, and have a good rest of the day.